Namaste everyone. Welcome to my short presentation on translation methodology. I'm Indra Ter. I'm an MPhil student at Nepal Open University, and this presentation has been prepared for the partial fulfillment of seminar on translation studies course. So here's my presentation overview. At first I shall discuss on translation methodology, then I shall also discuss on direct translation and oblique translation. Then I shall move on to discuss on the various methodology or procedures of oblique translation. Then I shall round off this presentation with a conclusion. So introduction to translation methodology. So by translation methodology we refer to various methods, techniques or procedures of translating from one language to another language. All the methods, procedures or techniques of translating have been broadly categorized into two types of methods, namely direct translation and oblique translation. So first of all, let's discuss on direct translation. So in direct translation, the translator transposes the source language text element by element into target language. By element, we mean by category, by structure, or maybe concept by concept. And there are accordingly two types of parallelism, two types of parallel categories, namely structural parallelism and metalinguistic parallelism. By structural parallelism, we mean the parallel structures between the source language and the target language. And by metalinguistic parallelism, we mean parallel categories between the source language and the target language. And the translator's job is to address or fill up the lacuna in the target language with corresponding elements. However, it should be noted that direct translation is not a word-for-word translation. So the purpose of my presentation is not to discuss on direct translation methods. My purpose is to discuss on oblique translation methods only. Therefore, I should like to skip this section. So oblique translation. So oblique translation is used to bring about desired stylistic effects in the translation. So in case of structural or metalinguistic differences, syntax and lexeme may be ordered or reordered to achieve the desired stylistic effect. So oblique method is the new way of bringing about the desired stylistic effect in translation. And there are four oblique methods, namely transposition, modulation, equivalence, and adaptation. But before we discuss on these four methods, I should like to state one of the quote from Naida and Tabor. The best translation does not sound like a translation. Instead, it sounds like a transcreation, a new literary creation. Therefore, translation is a new literary creation in itself. So, having remarked on this quote, we'll discuss on different types of oblique translation. And first one is transposition. Transposition refers to changing of the word class in the target language without changing the lexical meaning. So it can be applied within the same language. It can also be applied within the same language. For example, in the case of interlingual translation. For example, in my opinion, politics is a game of fools can be translated into English language as I opine that politics is a game of fools. Here, the noun opinion has been transposed into opine, abhor. And transposition is mainly used to bring about clarity in the meaning as well as to save clumsiness, awkwardness in translation. and it is a technique of reordering or exchanging the words or phrases. So the words of the source language are reordered or exchanged in the target language. The transposed form is more literary in character, so it is kind of literary translation. Examples are here. Jivan Kada ki Phool can be translated into English language as a flower in the midst of thorns. Keep your voice up can be translated into Nepali language as Jorli Bolnos. Here, voice is a noun which has been transposed into a verb. So, modulation. Next type of oblique translation is modulation. So, modulation simply refers to a change of viewpoint or perspective, and it is very often a category of thought, change of category of thought, according to Binay and Darwin-Net. So it also involves change of grammatical category, change of grammatical category, and it also produces an accurate and idiomatic expression. For example, "म त डाँडाकी जुन हुँ" may be translated into English language as "I'm in my 11th hour." And it brings naturalness in translation and adds beauty. This means modulation is primarily used for aesthetic effect, creative effect, artistic effect in the translation. And the signifier is changed while the signifier remains the same. For example, "Ghar bhadama" can be translated into English as "to let." So modulation is a technique. It is a technique of using a new metaphor suitable to the TL culture. Let's see one interesting example. "Curiosity killed the cat" can be translated into Nepali language as "Najane gaउँको बाटो नसोध्नु." So we use equivalent idiomatic translations. It uses metonymy and a synecdoche lavishly to bring about the desired effect. For example, "सडकमा गाडी मोटरहरू गुडिरहेका थिएनन्" can be translated into English as "there were no wheels on the road." It also entails extensive knowledge of the TL on the part of the translator, and it is used when other techniques would result in grammatically correct but unsuitable, unidiomatic, or awkward expression. So here are types of modulation. So primarily there are two types of modulation: free or optional modulation and fixed or obligatory modulation. So free modulation. Free modulation is used when the translator is more interested in bringing about the closest equivalence in translation. So it is used for bringing about a closest equivalence in translation. For example, "उनी आफ्ना आमाबुवाकी लडेली छोरी थिइन्" can be translated into English as "she was the apple of her parents' eyes." Fixed or obligatory modulation. It is used when an expression in the TL is most favorable to use rather than a literal translation. For example, "म आकाशभन्दा पातला कुरा छुन्छु" can be translated as "and the ethereal is palpable to me." So this translation has been extracted from Mahakavi Devkota's poem Pagal and its translation "The Lunatic." So techniques of modulation. So there are various techniques of modulation used by translators. So first one is abstract to concrete or vice versa. For example, "I haven't heard a word from her" can be translated as "मैले उनीबाट कुनै खबर सुनेको छैन." Word is used for abstract meaning, which has been translated into cover as more concrete meaning. Means to result. "I'll drive you home" can be translated as "म तिमीलाई घर पुर्याइदिन्छु." So drive is means, home or घर is the result. Substance to object. "I do not wear gold" can be translated as म गहना लगाउँदिन. Gold is substance and gahana is object. Term reversal. For example, this cage cannot hold an animal this size can be translated as यो साइजको जनावर यस खोरमा अटाउन सक्दैन. So here the words have been transposed. Here terms are reversed. Negative contrast. Make sure you bring your identity card can be translated as परिचय पत्र ल्याउन नबिर्सिनु. नबिर्सिनु is negative contrast. Active to passive or vice versa. We slept the whole night can be translated into Nepali as रातभरि सुतियो, passive voice. Modulation techniques continued. So part to whole modulation. For example, there were no wheels on the road can be translated into Nepali as सडकमा गाडी मोटरहरू चलिरहेका थिएनन्. So wheels have been translated into गाडी मोटरहरू. One part to another part relationship. He does not have a brain can be translated as उसको बुद्धि नै छैन. Space to time. There was pin drop silence in the hall can be translated into Nepali as मैले हलमा प्रवेश गर्दा सुनसान थियो. So in the hall is space, प्रवेश गर्दा is the time, moment. Intervals and boundaries. For example, we'll see after a fortnight. हामी 15 दिनपछि भेट्नेछौँ, maybe 14 दिनपछि भेट्नेछौँ. So here interval has been changed with the boundary. Change of symbol. I earn an honest dollar is translated into English as म मेहनतको कमाई खान्छु. Honest dollar is the symbol of मेहनतको कमाई. So these are the various techniques of modulation. So modulation makes the translator exclaim, yes, that's exactly what I wanted to say, according to Finero 2016. So equivalence. So to get the concept of equivalence, let's define translation from the words of Naida and Tabor. So translation is reproducing in the receptor language the closest natural equivalent of the source language message, first in terms of the meaning and secondly in terms of style. So from this definition it follows that translation is a search for the closest equivalent in the receptor language, that is the target language. So, and what is an equivalence? An equivalence is an expression in the TL that is structurally and stylistically in close resemblance with an expression in the SL to be translated. For example, in English there's one phrase, to rain cats and dogs. If we translate this phrase into Nepali language literally, it will become humorous. But we can translate it into Nepali language as Musaldari Varsa Hunu. So equivalence. Adaptation. So adaptation is an extreme form of translation. This means that when other types of oblique translation do not work, then we resort to adaptation. So it's a special kind of equivalence too, and it's a kind of situational equivalence. It is used when a literal translation would produce a shocking message in the TL. For example, I took hot dog. If we translate it in literal way, it would produce a shocking message. For example, मैले तातो कुकुर खाएँ. So this is a shocking message. Rather, we could translate it as मैले kebab खाएँ, or maybe मैले मासु खाएँ, etc. Another example is she is fucking beautiful, or she is freaking beautiful, can be translated as उनी निस्सिम सुन्दर छिन्. If we translate this sentence literally, it would produce a shocking message in the TL. So titles of books and movies undergo this process. For example, Shakespeare's drama Hamlet has been translated into a cinema in cinematographic form as Heather. So conclusion, we use oblique translation when literal translation would produce unidiomatic or awkward translation. And we use oblique translation to make the translation natural. We use oblique translation for a certain stylistic effect. So oblique translation requires a great expertise and deep insight into both SL and TL on part of the translation. So here's my list of references I've cited in this presentation. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for watching my video presentation. And if you have any queries, please type them in the comment section below. Thank you very much.